No commentator on October the 7th last year, myself included, would have predicted that the war would still be fought with the utmost ferocity a year on. No one would have predicted that Israel would be fighting for longer than it did when it established its state in 1948. All wars Israel has fought since have been brief shows of absolute strength, but it's not for want of trying. Israel has made Gaza uninhabitable. More than 70% of its homes have been damaged or destroyed. The Israeli military is now demolishing Tyre and Beirut. But no one is raising the white flag, nor are there signs of revolt from a population intense that has lost over 41,000 people directly from bombing and possibly 3 or 4 times more in indirect deaths. This people has been starved. It's disease-ridden. It's about to face a second winter intense. It's being bombed daily, and still it will not submit. This scale of suffering has never been visited on previous generations of Palestinians, but no one is fleeing or heading for the boats. From the start, there have been 2 clear strategies from the 2 generals of this war, Benjamin Netanyahu and Yahya Sinwar. Netanyahu had 4 declared objectives in the aftermath of the Hamas attack: to return the hostages, to smash all resistance, to end Iran's nuclear program, and to reorder the region with Israel on top. As soon became obvious to the families of the hostages, his own negotiating team, Hamas and the Americans, Netanyahu had no intention of getting his hostages back home. But he's failed too to smash Hamas. The movement is still in control of Gaza, despite 2 attempts at replacing it as a government. Hamas re-emerges wherever Israeli troops are not. Plainclothes officers turn up to police disputes or organise aid within a matter of hours. The Israeli military keep on saying Hamas is weakened, but Tel Aviv keeps on being surprised by rockets from Khan Yunis, a city that's been twice occupied by Israeli troops and laid to waste. Israeli generals think that they can disable the resistance movement by killing its leaders. Hezbollah's leadership has indeed been knocked sideways by a series of intelligence coups, starting with the explosions of thousands of booby-trapped pages and walkie-talkies. Its leader, Hassan Nasrallah, was killed in a bunker 14 stories below ground by using 81 tons of explosive. His deputy may be dead before even he had a chance to take over. But look at the way Hezbollah is fighting now in southern Lebanon. It's far from being incapacitated as a fighting force, as the reconnaissance unit of the Golani Brigade are finding out. Assassination is strictly short-term. In the long term, leaders are replaced, stocks replenished, and memories are avenged. Israel's terror only begets more terror. Netanyahu's 3rd goal was to finish Iran off as a nuclear and regional power. But the truth is that Iran was never central to the Palestinian cause. It only entered the fray after its revolution in 1978. And for over 100 years, the Palestinians have mostly fought on their own. The real threat to Israel is not from Iran. It's from a young Palestinian in Jenin, or a former presidential security guard in Hebron, or a Palestinian with Israeli citizenship in the Nakab. All these formed their own individual conclusions from the occupation under which they lived. None needed any prompting from Tehran. Netanyahu's 4th goal is to reorder the region with Israel at its head. Now, Israeli officials love to brief journalists about the private words of support they're getting from Arab leaders they define as moderate. But just look again at what Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman told the US Secretary of State recently, Antony Blinken, according to The Atlantic. Bin Salman told Blinken, "Do I care personally about the Palestinian issue? I don't, but my people do." As a result, Saudi Arabia's position has hardened. It announced last week it will only recognise Israel until after the establishment of a Palestinian state. Now let's look at Sinwar's strategic goals on October the 7th and see which, if any, have survived the passage of time. He had 2 strategic goals before the attack on October the 7th. In one speech, he said the occupation must be made more costly for Israel. In another, Sinwar said Palestinians had to present Israel with a clear choice: to force Israel to withdraw from the Palestinian territory it occupies, or to isolate it from the region and the international community. On the first count, Hamas has indeed made the occupation more expensive. Since the war started, 1,664 Israelis have been killed, of which 706 were soldiers, and 17,809 were wounded. The economy is taking a hit, and money has begun to flee the country. 2 billion left Israeli banks from May to July this year. But the sharpest blow that Sinwar's Hamas delivered to Israel was a psychological one. The sudden and complete collapse of the Israeli military a year ago delivered a shock from which Israel has yet to recover. It fundamentally challenged the state's ability to defend its citizens. Since the beginning of the war, some 143,000 people have been evacuated from their homes. Alerts have sounded in almost 1,000 communities, forcing Israelis to run for their bunkers around 15,000 times. Insecurity has become a permanent way of life. But the biggest effect of the Hamas attack was on the Palestinian national cause itself. On October the 6th, it was pretty well dead, if not buried. After more than 30 years of Oslo, Gaza was isolated. Its siege was permanent, and no one seemed to care. Netanyahu claimed victory, waving a map in the UN in which the West Bank did not exist. There was only one item on the agenda, and that was Saudi Arabia's impending normalization with Israel. Under the most extreme leadership in its history, land for peace had been jettisoned, so too had been the policy of separation. By seizing the land and holding it, Israel was on the cusp of victory. After October the 7th, support for armed resistance is at an all-time high in the West Bank. If Oslo had succeeded in producing a Palestinian state within 5 years of its signing, a movement like Hamas would not have existed. Oslo not only failed to deliver a Palestinian state, it created the conditions for the Israeli state to expand and thrive as never before in the West Bank. This has been the biggest single factor in persuading a new generation of Palestinian youth to sell their taxis and shops for guns. Regionally, Israel's response to October the 7th has reversed decades of effort to convince the Gulf states that Palestine could no longer have a veto on Israeli-Arab relations. Today, that veto is stronger than before. Globally, Palestine has become the world's #1 human rights cause. It tops the agenda of efforts to secure international justice, with ongoing cases in the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice in The Hague. It has sparked the biggest protest movement of recent history here in the UK. Of the two strategies, Sinwar seems to be working. Whether he lives or dies, that agenda already has an unstoppable momentum of its own. Netanyahu and the army may well think they can occupy northern Gaza and southern Lebanon. The annexation of most of the West Bank is next. But they will not be able to finish what they have started. Returning the lands they have captured to peace will be a bridge too far, as it was for Ariel Sharon, who was forced to withdraw from Gaza, or Ehud Barak, who ended the occupation of Lebanon. Internationally, Israel is more isolated than any time of its history. This war has stripped Israel of its liberal Zionist image, the image of the new kid on the block trying to defend itself in a tough neighborhood. It has been replaced by the image of a regional ogre with no moral compass. Netanyahu's war is a year old and has no reverse gear. Sinwar's war has only just started. Who will win? That will depend on the depth of Palestinian resilience. I would be surprised if there are not those who said, "We've had enough, we want to stop." But 1 year on, the spirit of resistance is high and still growing. If I'm right, this fight is only just beginning. The power equation in the Middle East has indeed changed, but not in Israel's or America's.